Hi everybody, today I want to briefly talk about the 7 rules of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the design and ability of our brain to form, create, and change synaptic connections. In other words, it is the ability of our brain to change, modify, and adapt throughout our lifetime. I know I can't speak for everyone, but many of us grew up under the impression and the scientific understanding at that time of believing that we grew up, we reached a certain age, our organs reached their peak maturity, and then afterwards our genetics kicked in and ultimately determined our biological destiny. We now know that this is absolutely not true. Most of our organs, and especially our brain, are very adaptable and designed to adapt and change throughout our lifetime. Our brain is something that we can begin to take control of and help and nurture this process of neuroplastic reformation in the brain. So the 7 rules of neuroplasticity all begin and end in the mind. This also plays into the biology of belief. This plays into understanding how our thoughts, how our behaviors, and everything around us play into what is happening in our brain and ultimately in our nervous system and in our bodies. The beginning and end of all human experience is in the nervous system. So our 7 rules of neuroplasticity are mindfulness, our choices, intention, focus, repetition, emotion, and belief. And I'll go into these all in more detail in a moment. So one thing I want to touch on before we go into the 7 rules or the 7 kind of pillars of neuroplasticity is that we really need to understand that absolutely everything that is around us, everything that we are ingesting and constantly exposing ourselves to is having an impact on our brain, and with enough repetition is wiring itself into our brain. The more we do something, the more it becomes ingrained in our neural pathways and ultimately becomes autonomic behaviors, which are our habits, our very ingrained beliefs, our opinions, things that we've thought over and over and over again that become wired into our brain. We can think of this kind of like a hiking trail, or if there are several hiking trails that are all ending in one location. The trails that we take often are going to be easy to travel, faster to travel, very nicely pruned, and the ones that aren't traveled as often are going to be a little bit slower, harder to get through. We're going to have to clear away some debris and brush, and our brain is very much the same. And so neuroplasticity and understanding how to create positive and beneficial neural pathways in our brain is very much like pruning those trails that we want and allowing the ones we don't want to grow over. So understanding neuroplasticity, and in the context of meditation and wellness and yoga, is really learning how to sit back in the driver's seat of controlling our emotions, controlling our behaviors, being aware, being conscious, being present for our life. So for mindfulness, this is our first point, our first pillar of neuroplasticity. Are we always aware of what we're thinking? Are we aware of our awareness, of our consciousness? And this is something we dive in pretty deeply to in meditation, is becoming this observer. Simply in the fact that we are able to observe our thoughts from a separate perspective denotes that we are not our thoughts. But so often when we become a victim or run by our autopilot behaviors, we believe we are our thoughts. We're so caught up in the projection of what's happening or what we feel is happening in our present moment that we don't take that step back to be aware of what's actually happening in our internal landscape in our mind. So are we aware of our programming? Are we aware of we're going into our triggers, our programs, our autonomic behaviors? Are we aware of it? So our very first pillar of and point of neuroplasticity is, can we be mindful of what's happening and when is it happening? Our second pillar or point of neuroplasticity is choices. Are we consciously or unconsciously making choices? We might be surprised to find out what percentage of human behavior and human choices is based off of automatic, primal, cerebellum brain behavior. We might be aware of when we're making big decisions or even moderate decisions. We're aware that we're making a choice of what we're having for dinner. We're aware of where we travel to. We're aware of where we choose to spend our time. But there's so many small points throughout the day where we're making tiny little choices, but we don't realize that our programmings are running the show, that before we've even consciously thought that we have a choice at what's happening, we're already making the choice. And that brings us to our third point of neuroplasticity, which is intention. Do we know what our intention is? Do we know what we want? Do we know what goal we want to have in mind? Intention is a really powerful thing. It's a creation of direction for our life. It's a creation of understanding, of awareness of where we want to go, where we want to be, what we want to do. Intention is a word that is thrown out a lot in the wellness world at the beginning of yoga classes, but we can take it back for ourselves. We can really understand that the power of intention, when we truly have an intention, when we can define clearly and specifically what it is that we want for ourselves, for our own internal experience, and in our life outside of us, we can begin to create it. And what I mean by we can begin to create it is we can begin to create it in our brain. And this leads me into my next point, the fourth pillar of neuroplasticity, which is focus. And this all has to do with the human ability to be motivated to do things. We need to be motivated to focus on what it is that we want. We need to be able to focus on the ways in which we want to achieve what we want. Do we know our progress? Can we be aware of where we want to be and our progress into getting there while also being grounded and rooted in the present moment? And our fifth pillar of neuroplasticity is repetition. So repetition is kind of the crux of neuroplasticity. It takes repetition to wire things into our brain. That is the process. When we think, when we experience, when we make it an emotional embodiment, to get it into that doing part of our brain, to that automatic, that behavioral part of our brain, we have to repeat it over and over again. So this can be, for example, on a more gross scale of learning how to play the piano or learning how to play the guitar. We have to do something over and over and over again to train our mind, to train our body, and then allow the two to sync up. And then eventually we won't have to think about it so hard, it'll just become a habit. And we can use the same framework, this same understanding about how humans learn things for something not so tangible, for maybe an emotion that we want, for joy. So that leads me to our sixth point of neuroplasticity, which is emotion. Are we having positive emotions and feelings about where we are and where we want to go? Think right now for a moment about all the memories that we have. Which memories stand out to you? I would bet my hat that they are memories that have a high emotional charge to them. We remember that really blissful feeling of a beautiful vista on a mountaintop. We remember the sadness of losing a loved one or a lover. We remember the joy and sadness of viewing a loved one get married. All of these types of memories are more visceral or more potent, are better wired into our brain because they have an emotion attached to them. And that's something that really comes down to the biology of our brain. When our limbic system gets involved in the memory-making process, it releases chemicals, it releases peptides into our body that allows our body to chemically memorize the emotion, the state, or the happening that we are experiencing. And what's really amazing is that our brain doesn't know the difference between something that's happening internally and that's happening externally. It believes what we tell it to do. In this sense, it's very much like a computer or a supercomputer. It doesn't know if it's true or false, right or wrong. It will believe what we tell it to believe. So coming back to emotion, what emotions do we want to attach to whatever it is that we're doing, to whatever it is that we want, to whatever pathways or thoughts or programs that we want to wire into our brain? Are they positive? Are they helpful? Are they joyful? And finally, do we have belief? And this is where we can bridge into the more etheric or spiritual realms of these concepts. But do we have belief in what we're doing? Whether that resonates with you or not, statistics show that those that believe in what they're doing, those that believe in where they're going, are the ones more likely to achieve it. They're the ones that do. So when we can attach belief to our intention, to our focus, so these are pillars that stack on top of one another, but they also help play into each other. They're like Jenga blocks. You need the others to allow the whole thing to come together. Mindfulness, number one, being aware of our thoughts. This is our starting block, our foundation, to being aware of the choices that we're making. Are they conscious or unconscious? To our intention. What is our intention? Where do we want to go? What do we want to feel and why? To our focus, to allowing us to be detailed about what we want so we can go after it. To repetition, kind of the crux of neuroplasticity. Repetition is what allows our brain to wire things in. Finally, to emotion, that will really heighten and assist this wiring in, this programming of our brain, empowering the programs and the thought processes that we do want, and disempowering the ones that we do not. And then finally, belief. Do we believe in what we're doing? Do we believe in ourselves? Do we believe in what we're doing and in life, in the outcome of whatever it is that we've set our minds to? So once again, just to revisit this concept of neuroplasticity, it is the design of our brain to change, to rewire, to disempower the old and unwanted and empower the new as far as neurological pathways. It really puts us back into the driver's seat and really is so interconnected to mindfulness and meditation that we can't separate them. When we are mindful and aware of our thought processes, our reactions, our automatic reactions to life, then we can begin to make those choices. Do I want to keep reacting like this? Do I want to be conscious or unconscious in my day-to-day life? And ultimately, we can use this as a lens, as an understanding to help empower ourselves to create the life that we want. So I hope this was interesting for you. If you have any more questions about neuroplasticity, mindfulness, or the pillars of neuroplasticity, please do not hesitate to reach out. And I hope you have a wonderful day.